Okay, I think I'm sufficiently drunk for the second episode of Drunken JS, learning web development from scratch. Let me move the mic a little closer. Okay, so the last time we spoke, we were working on these three guys, the two HTML files and an image file. And we're basically concentrating on HTML and just opening up the browser and editing it with Notepad. But this time we're going to add a little spice to it. We're going to do some CSS. So if you ever look at front-end web development or just HTML development in general, you're going to see the terms HTML, CSS, and JS. So we're going to start in with CSS in this particular episode. It's going to be a core part of this particular episode. I will say, like last episode, I did mention that Sublime Text is what I would do the next episodes with. So this is Sublime Text. It's freely available if you just search for sublimetext.org and download it and install it. You'll see this when you first start out. And what I recommend, that little folder that we created, I called it web dev. If you go to view and you go to sidebar, show sidebar, you see open files here on the left, this gray area. What I recommend is you drag that folder over here and boom, there's our folder. So now we can actually look at the files that we created in the last episode. Now we're gonna start in with CSS. I'm gonna make this a little smaller now. I did mention the p tag. I would recommend surrounding this with p tag, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So CSS is a way to style just about everything on your web page. It's going to include the text. It's going to include the containers that hold your content, whether it be text or images or that kind of thing. It's going to be to style the images themselves, so you can give them different sizes, different colors, different spacings, tons of different options. There's three different ways to apply CSS styling to your HTML file. And I will go for that in a second. Let me go ahead and open a web browser. And it's going to say your file was not found. And let's go ahead and do Control O to open, and we're going to go ahead and open this file. Go to the else. So let me go ahead and minimize that, and let's resize. Okay, there we go. Go to the else. This is the something else file. So we want this something.html. So you see up at the top something.html. That's what I'm working with here. And in the web browser, I'm looking at something.html. So I have this link. Go to the else. You see that here. And let's just go ahead and type some shit. So let's go ahead and type some shit. Okay, so everything's here. So there's three ways to apply CSS to some markup. And so the very first way, and actually before I even do that, let's go ahead. This link here is just sitting out by itself. You see the rest of these are surrounded by p tags. Let's go ahead and surround this with a p tag. There we go. So the first way to apply CSS is to use a style attribute. And if you remember the last episode, in this case where my cursor is right now, where I'm dancing around, the P is my tag. This is a tag of P, and attribute are things inside of that tag with like the name and an equals and then quotation marks and then some stuff. So with CSS, you can do a style attribute on just about any element, any tag that you see. You can put an attribute of style on it, and inside of that style attribute, you can add CSS. So what is CSS? So let's start off with some simple examples. So here's this, let's just go ahead and type some shit. And so for the style attribute, I'm going to type in the color of red. I'm going to put a semicolon. And let's go ahead and file and save, which is Control S. And when I save that, and I'm going to go click back over to my browser. And if I hit refresh, which is Control R, boom, it's red text. And so that's basically it. That's the first way to include CSS in your web file document. There's another way. If we add a class attribute and we say, let's go ahead, and then we do a style tag. So here's a style tag. And so now we get into what's called CSS selectors. So if we want to say for every p tag, put an open brace and a close brace, and we're going to say color red. So every single p tag on in this web document, and includes this Kettle One vodka is the best ever, and so their shit is on a different line. And let's just go ahead and type some shit. All of this, because of this CSS selector, because of P, it's going to say for every P, make the color of the text red. So if I do file and save, and then go back here and I hit refresh, now all the text is red, except for the link, because the link has its own color, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But for everything else is just using the color that we give it. So it's a p tag. But here we got this class of let's go ahead. And what if we want to make that a different color? So for classes, if we want to say for every class, do a particular CSS rule. And this is what's called a CSS rule. Use a period. So period. And let's go ahead. So you see that matches this class here. And do another open brace with a closed brace. And we say color, and I don't know, fuchsia. I think that's no, maybe not. Okay, purple. Make that purple. File, save, come back over to the browser, refresh. And now that's purple. And there's another CSS selector that we can use, ID equals this shit. And for ID attributes, you want to use, instead of this period, you use a pound sign, this shit, color blue. And we're going to go ahead and do file and save. And we're going to refresh, boom. It's blue now. And so there's an order of precedence that happens here. So if I do also class, let's go ahead, file, save. So this class, let's go ahead, is of color purple, but it also has the ID of this shit. So it's important to know that an ID takes precedence over a class, and a class takes precedence over a tag name. So the ID of this shit takes precedence over the class of let's go ahead, takes precedence over just the tag. So here it's saying every p tag, make it color red, but this is saying that every tag that has a class of let's go ahead, which is this one, and this one gets a color purple. So this would take precedence over any p tag, over just any naked p tag. But if it's got an ID, which is the pound sign ID of this shit, that's going to take precedence over both of these. And so it's going to say, hey, even though you guys got this, color red and this color purple, if this p tag has an ID of this shit, hey, we're going to make this color blue. So that's CSS order precedence. So I'm hitting Control S to save and refresh. And so this shit is on a different line. This has an ID of this shit, this tag. So anything inside this tag gets the color blue. So you see, so this shit is on a different line is the color blue. Okay, so that's font color. So what if we want to make the font size a little bigger or smaller? So there's a few different ways to specify size in HTML. I'm going to start you off with the simplest probably. And that's going to be in pixels. So let's go ahead and do font size. And we'll make this 14 pixels. Control S to save. And refresh. And so it actually got a little smaller. So I guess the default size was a little bigger than 14 pixels. So if I go, let's make this 24 pixels in size, and file and save, or Control S, refresh, boom, it's a lot bigger. So every p tag gets 24 pics. So let's go ahead and squinch this down a little bit more again, make this 14 pics, and refresh. So we're back to where we were with 14 pixel font. So what about this shit? So this is the p tag with the ID of this shit, which is the pound sign, which matches up with the ID. So this shit is on a different line. What if we want to make that one bigger? So we just put that down here instead, and we'll make that 24 pics, and file, save, and refresh. Boom. So this is on a different line. It's way bigger now than the rest of the text. So that's font size. Then there's text decoration. What if we want to make everything with a class of let's go ahead? Which is this one. So this shit is on a different line, and this one's got that class. Let's just go ahead and type some shit. These both have the let's go ahead class. Let me go ahead and widen this out slightly. So there's this class. Let's go ahead. So let's go ahead and say that we want all of those to have an underline to it. So that we do that with a text decoration rule. So we do text dash decoration, and we type in underline, and then we go and file, save, and now we're gonna refresh. Boom. These two got it. This Kettle One vodka is the best it's ever. Didn't get an underline. Let's find out why. Yep, because it does not have the class. Let's go ahead. I only added underline to let's go ahead, the class. So, and Kettle One vodka is the best ever. Does not have that class. It's just a regular p tag with no attributes. So that's how you underline things. Another CSS property that is pretty common that you'll see is font family. Let's go ahead and do font family. Before I finish typing that though, if you look at this, these are serif fonts. You see these little, like if you look at the H, there's at the bases, there's the sort of like lunar lander sort of feet to them, and the top of the H has that little divot on it. Those are called serifs. So what if we want to make like all the text sans serif, which means it doesn't, we want a font that doesn't have any of those extra decorative things to them. So let's go ahead and on the p tag, we'll finish typing this out. Font family, sans, serif. And you see how Sublime Text is like trying to be helpful and saying, hey, you probably mean sans serif as I was typing it. That's one of the benefits of using an editor like Sublime Text. Sublime Text also gives you all the colorations that you see here. The red lettering is is for tags. The attributes get a green name, and then the yellow value, and just regular text gets white. So yeah, so let's go ahead and file and save. And now because I put font family sans serif on every p tag, all these p tags should get a new font with none of these serif decorations on it. So if I refresh, boom, now it's a much simplified font. And it depends on what computer you're using or what operating system you're using, which font that it's choosing to use at this point. So there's ways where you can actually tell it what specific font that you want. And in that case, if you want Tacoma or let's go ahead and Tacoma. Oh man, I think it's Tacoma. Control refresh. Let's go ahead and use Arial Narrow. Is it lowercase? It might be. Maybe it's caps. And save. Okay. Or just Arial, I guess. Maybe Helvetica. Maybe that'll work if I Control S. Alright, same shit. Anyway, so this is sort of, I don't know, it's saying that it can't find Helvetica, or at least the fonts didn't change. So the way this font family CSS rule works is if you specify a name of a font and it can't find it, then whatever's the next down the line, and in this case it's sans serif, after the comma, it'll try to use that. So we could actually use like Arial. So if it can't find Helvetica, then it'll look after the next comma, which is this guy. And it'll say, hey, we can't find Helvetica, let's try Arial. And if it can't find Arial, then it'll just do, hey, just pick any sans serif font. And so it'll pick one of those three anyway. So yeah, that's font family. There's more to it than that, but we're just gonna leave it at that for now. So one cool thing is that you can attach CSS styling to just about every tag that you see on this page. Mostly HTML, the body tag, and anything inside the body tag can receive styling. And so in this next case that I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to attach CSS styling to the body tag, and the body tag is just representative of like your entire web document. And so I'm going to create a new rule, and since it's just a tag, we just type it out verbatim what the tag name is. We just make a new rule, and I'm going to show you a new CSS rule, and it's called text align. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do center, and there's left and right as well if you want, but we're going to do center for now. And this was going to center align all the text on the page. So when I hit refresh, boom, center aligned inside the body. And so on top of order of precedence that I was explaining before, where an ID trumps a CSS, trumps a tag, and there's also inheritance, which means that every tag that's a child of body is going to receive this rule unless overwritten. So the p tags and the image tags and all that are going to receive text align center, unless I say in one of these other tags and in these other CSS rules to do a different text align. That'll probably overwrite this text align center. But I attach it to the body tag, so everything inside the body tag should be text align center. And that's what we got with this web page here. I did mention that there are 3 ways to attach CSS to your web document. And so I showed you 2 already. One was with the style attribute. And just a review, you could do style equals color yellow. And that'll always take precedence over this using the style tag if there's a style attribute on a tag specifically. If I hit refresh, let's go ahead and type some shit, turn yellow. So that's one way. Then using the style tag with CSS rules is another way. Then there's another way where you can actually create a new file. So we're gonna go ahead and copy this, right click, copy. I'm gonna paste this into a new file. Let's go ahead and left indent that. And I'm gonna hit file, save. And now we're gonna call this styles.css, save. And boom, because I gave it the CSS extension, Sublime Text decided to go ahead and give me some helpful colorization to help me visualize my code a little better than it was. So here's the problem. So if I get rid of this now, I've got my CSS all stored in this other file here. And I'm gonna go ahead and file, save this, and hit refresh. Oh no, I lost all my styling. Why is that? Well, I gotta link my HTML document to this new styles CSS file. And how do I do that? I do that inside the head tag. This is one of the uses of the head tag. And you do that by using a link tag. And you do your link rel equals style sheet. You say, hey, that's what it is. This file that I want to include is a style sheet. And by style sheet, I mean a file that has a whole bunch of CSS in it. And then you do href equals styles CSS. And I put a slash end tag on it. So file, save, and hit refresh, and boom, all my styling is back. So that worked because if you look back in Windows Explorer, our new style CSS file is in the same directory as the something.html. One thing you may want to get into the habit of in the future is putting styles in a separate directory. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. If I right click and I do new and folder, as I'm going to call this folder CSS. And I'm gonna click and drag the style CSS file into the CSS folder. So you see it's just by itself now. Now if I hit back, how do I get to it from here? Now something.html is here, and my style CSS file, which I've included in this link tag up here, is now in this folder. See, the folder is called CSS. So I just put CSS in front of it. Now, whatever I called the folder, I would have called it that. So file and save and refresh. And you see nothing changed because the style is still being applied. So this is what we call a relative URL. It just means the paths like this one is what we call a path to a file or an address. The path to the file is relative to the HTML file. So in this case, we're editing something.html, which is here. And we're saying that relative to something.html, there is a folder called CSS. And in it is the styles file that we want to include. And we put a slash there. So CSS slash and then style CSS. And that will correctly link that CSS file to my HTML file and let the CSS still take effect. So that's the 3 ways to include CSS. You can do it with a style attribute on a tag, style equals blah blah blah, or you can do a style tag, if I could type, some CSS stuff here. You can do it that way, or you could put it in a separate file and link to it. That's the 3 ways to access CSS. So that's cool. So for my next trick, I'm gonna take Kettle One vodka. It was 100, I just changed it to 50 width, and the height is gonna change along with it, so it's a lot smaller now. Let me go back to our CSS file real quick. I'm gonna change these font sizes. Let's make them smaller. Let's make these 16 pixels. Hit save on that and refresh. And zoom in a little bit. Okay. And let's make this 26 pixels. This is our other file. Okay, so we got 4 pieces of text, 4 lines of text, all in different p tags. What would happen if we want to, you know, go ahead and like let's go ahead and take these 2. Kettle One vodka is the bestest ever, and this image, and we want to put it in a box to the right, and we'll keep the other text off to the left. So how do we do that? So we're going to introduce you to your first container tags. There's normal regular tags again, but we're going to call it div. Div is the most basic, most generic type of container tag you can have. So I'm going to hit tab to move these guys over. And let's close the div tag. And I'm going to put these 2, the Kettle One vodka is the bestest ever, and the image tag. And we're going to put that in a div. So if I hit save and refresh, you'll notice nothing changed. Now to see what we're dealing with, I'm going to introduce you to some more CSS. So div is a tag. So if we go back to CSS, I can go down here and make another rule and say div, and here's a new rule for you. Border colon, and yes, I want to, so basically I want to put a border around these containers so you can see exactly where they are and what they're doing and what they're containing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give all the divs on the page a border. So the border is the first sort of compound tag that I'm going to mention. And by compound, I just mean that there's like a few different things to it. So the first, and you'll see what I mean in a second. This will make a lot more sense once I type it out. But this border, I want to make it really obvious while we're starting out here. I want a red border that's 1 pixel thick, and I just want it to be a solid line. So I'm just going to say 1 border 1 pix. So the same thing as the font size. PX means pixels. So I want this border to be 1 pixel in width, and I want it to be a solid line, and I want it to be red in color. So for border, you do one thing. The first thing that you put in there is going to be the thickness. You put a space, and the second thing you put in there is the style of the border, and then the third thing you put in there is the color. And so in this case, I want every div to have a 1 pixel width border that's solid and it's red. So if I hit file and save, and then I refresh, nothing happens. Why is that? Because for some reason it's saving to style CSS down here. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna do this, delete, and I'm gonna hit file and save as, make sure it's saving into the right folder. So here's WebDev. I'm gonna go into the CSS folder and save it here and replace it. Boom. Okay. Now if I refresh, boom. So here's your div tags. You see, I gave every div tag a red border. So, and if you remember back in the actual HTML, which we call markup, there's a div tag here, and it's containing these 3 lines of text. And then there's a div tag here, and it's containing this line of text and the image of the body of the bottle. And you'll see when I come back here, that's what I get. Go to the else, let's go ahead and type some shit. So this is on a different line, Ketel One Vodka is the bestest ever. So that's all there. So these divs, by default, div tag will stretch across the screen. It'll stretch as far as it can possibly go within whatever it's contained in. In this case, it's contained in the body tag, because that's the immediate ancestor. In this case, body tag. So div is an initial child of the body tag, and so it's going to stretch all the way across the body of the document. And also by default, a div tag will line break. So you'll see that this container up top and this div on the bottom are stacked on top of each other. That's because each div has a line break by default. So it's always going to want to take it up its width on a line by itself, and it's going to push anything else down below it. So those are container tags. The body tag is actually technically a container tag as well. So what if I really like this and I want to change? I'm gonna do some really ugly shit here in a second. But there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with containers. And so with this div, well, let's say I want to change the width on these. So what if I want to make it, each div tag, I want to make them 50%. And what does 50% mean? 50% means the width of the width of the parent tag. In this case, is the body tag. So if I refresh, let's say boom. So the whole body of the document stretches all the way across, but because I made it width 50%, it made these div tags 50%. So funnily enough, if I resize my browser, you'll see that the 50% holds no matter what width I move the browser in. Now, you don't have to just use percentages. You can also use pixels. So what if I say 500 pixels as the width, and file, save, refresh. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take the browser's word for it that this is 500 pixels. I see this is a pretty good size. Now if I resize this, see it stays the same size, the same width. It doesn't adjust at all like the percentage did. So okay, so that's width. We did border. What about float? Let me go ahead and set this width to 200 pixels, which is much narrower. All right, refresh. Boom. They're in little boxes like this. And there's a thing called float. I try to recommend not using float as much as possible, but it's good to know how it works. Float will just basically it's one way to ditch the line break so that these won't necessarily stack on top of each other. because as I was mentioning before, by default, a div tag will actually line break. And that's why this Kettle One vodka is the bestest ever and this image here are below the first div tag. This div tag with float should come up to the right here. And it'll treat it sort of more or less like text. So I saved it out. Now if I hit refresh, now you'll see this one is here. So these are both floated left. There's other ways to do that, which we'll get into later. But for now, that's one thing that float will do for you. Let's go ahead and let's go back to our markup. So we have these two div tags. Number 1 and number 2. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add a class of go else. We'll add a class to this one. Class equals vodka. I can call these anything I want to. So when I go back to the CSS, I can use this class or this class to refer to this particular div. You can also use IDs, go else, and save. Like there's nothing special about what you put in class or ID as long as it matches up with the CSS. So here's go else as a class. And if you remember before with this up here, for a class you put a period. And go back here. The class is called go else. Go else. So anything with the class of go else, including this div tag here, this CSS will apply to. There's nothing in it right now, but I'm about to type some stuff in there. So you see everything is center aligned. Now, what if I just want to make this top div? What if I want to make that right aligned? Let's go ahead and do that. Text align right. Control S for save. And refresh. I see this is all right aligned. And it looks ugly as shit, but that's not important. So let's say that, hey, that's ugly. Let's make that left. So Control S to save, refresh, now it's left aligned. But this one stays center aligned. Kettle One vodka is the bestest ever, stays center. That's because this div tag was given via the class left align, whereas the body tag by default, and actually I'm sorry, yeah, the body tag by default has text align center. So this div tag didn't overwrite the text align, so it's saying, hey, we'll just go ahead and keep using the center line. So everything inside of here just takes on whatever the body tag has, and this over here takes on the left align because it was told specifically to do that. So let's learn a new CSS rule. Another one. Go else. So this class of go else is referring to this div again. And what if I want to put a background color to it? So let's go ahead and type that out. Background. You can see all these cool like rules that you can use. I'm gonna use background color, and I'm gonna say gray. And file, save, refresh. Now it's got a gray background and looks even uglier now, but it's fun. So that's basic background color. And say that, you know what, that's ugly. So I'm gonna change this back to white. And you know what I'm gonna do? This body tag, which is the tag that contains all my content, which is all this. What if I want to make the body gray and keep this white? So let's go ahead and do that. So on the body tag, way up at the top here, I'm gonna type in background color gray and file, save, refresh. Boom. Now this is white, and this takes on the background color of the background because I didn't tell it any specific background color. All I told it was anything with a class of go else to have background color white, and in this case that's our first div because of class go else. So what if we want to make that one background color white? Let's go ahead and move this. I'm gonna hit cut. I'm gonna go up to here to the divs, and so now every div will have a background color of white, not just the go else. So let's go ahead and file, save, and refresh. Boom. Now both of the divs have white background. Okay, so moving on. So there's two different ways. So you notice that this kind of looks ugly, that this left box here to go to else, and let's just go ahead and type some shit, and so this shit is on a different line. This box here, you notice that there's like this left line right to the very edge of this box and it looks kind of ugly. So how do we cure that? And the way to do that is with something called padding. So there's two different ways of spacing things that seem very similar when you see it in the code, but act on very different things. So padding is internal spacing. So padding is like these edges and the space and the area that this box takes up stays the same, but the space in between, or from the edges to the content, will change. So I'm gonna go ahead and say for every div I want a padding of, let's make it 8 pixels, make it a lot, just so you can see what it looks like. File and save and refresh. Boom. So you see it now, there's 8 pixels from the top and the left and the bottom and the right on both of these divs, because I added it to the div CSS rule. So both of these div elements now have a padding of 8 pixels from all 4 sides, which is cool. Then there's another thing called margin, and we're going to make that 8 pixels as well. 8 pixels. File, save. Now if I hit refresh, so margin is kind of the opposite of padding. Margin is, instead of the spacing from the internally from the edge to the content, margin is the spacing from the edge of the div to everything else around it. So the body tag actually has some padding, and so you're actually seeing the body padding plus the margin around these boxes. I gave it 8 pixels each div has, so this is actually, you know, this has margin of 8, which probably ends here, and then this other div has margin of 8, so it ends about here. So this is about 16 pixels in between. So each one has about 8 pixels of padding around it. So yeah, that's margin, and that's some pretty easy stuff. So the next episode, we're going to start getting more into some of the more complicated values for things. Like this is a very simple notation for padding and margin, but there's ways where you can split it out. Also, I've only been using colors by name. In the next episode, we'll get into hexadecimal color codes and RGBs and that kind of thing. And we'll get some more advanced CSS, otherwise known as cascading style sheets. So yeah, we'll see you in the next episode, and hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you were able to follow that. I am still sort of buzzed, still sort of drunk, so hopefully any of that made sense. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna sign off for now. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe and blah 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 blah. All right, yeah, until next time, see ya.